Sorry, guys, the phone rang, um, and I had to pick it up. But now I'm doing part two of my Storytime Sunday installment called The Will. So, as I was saying, Brian um, had a whole Brian had a whole bunch of reservations about doing this because his lifestyle he couldn't go out with women like he did. He couldn't be a playboy like he was. But then he got something in the mail to say that if he didn't marry Clara for a year and agree with the stipulations of his uncle's will, that he would just be cut off. And Clara um, went to work at her organization. She wheeled her power chair into work and looked at all the organization and looked at all the bills that were piling up. So she felt the Lord saying, "Marry him; it will change your life and his life for the better." So they called up each other and said, "You know what? Let's do this." And then, okay, a few about a week later, they went to the courthouse and got the marriage license. And then a few days after that, they got married. And so when they got married, right after they got married, because before they got married, Brian was thinking that he could still be a playboy and whatever. So after they got married, the lawyer stood outside of the church and gave them each a piece of paper and said the stipulations for their marriage were no cheating and that he had to learn how to run the company from the leader of the board who was named Joseph. And Joseph had worked under his father for years. And so, and he wanted the company, but um, his 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 uncle gave it to the nephew, so Joseph was very jealous. But at that time, when we first meet Joseph, which is the CEO of the board, we don't know that he's very jealous. We think that he's a nice guy and, whatever. So what happens so basically the first little, and also the stipulations to make sure that he doesn't cheat or she doesn't cheat and break the stipulations is that his father put in place two detectives, two married Christian detectives, Mary and Harry. One person to follow him and one person to follow her. So when they were okay, so after they got married and read the stipulations, he was not very happy that not only he had to stay faithful to a woman that he didn't love, but he had to he had to live this life that he didn't want. And then he was like he was very rude to her and very standoffish. They lived in this beautiful house, which her grandfather and his grandfather had bought for them to live together after to live in for the years. But um, like this has had everything: wheelchair accessible showers, everything for her wheelchair accessible showers, wheelchair, everything was accessible and it was beautiful. Um, and never mind the two bodyguards that were looking after that were making sure that neither of them cheated. And then when they first got married, it was very awkward because they were total strangers, and he was Brian was really mean to Clara. Not really mean, but just really standoffish and really rude because he was missing his lifestyle that he was used to. And what happened was um, he just um, didn't really want to be in this life. So he, he, he wouldn't talk to her. He wouldn't do anything for her. He's like, why am I doing married to this disabled girl? And this is just not how I would want it. And then um and then at the office over time, he when he first got to the office, because remember, getting married to Clara was one of the stipulations, but running the company and learning responsibility was the other stipulation. So he went into work looking all sloppy and whatever. And Joseph, the head of the board, actually said, if you're going to work at this business as an investment banker like your uncle, you've got to change. So Joseph kind of groomed him. Not kind of, he did groom him. So he showed him how to dress, he showed him how to uh, act himself, be himself, and not be himself. He showed him how to actually act like a businessman. And at first, um, Brian just wanted to do everything to get his money. But over time, he actually started um, he actually started liking the work and liking the people. He met a whole bunch of people. What actually started to change his mind was that he met a whole bunch of people that were so positively impacted by what his uncle did, by the lives his uncle were changing, that he just began to have a new appreciation for what his uncle did. His uncle bought houses for people that he worked for, got people off the streets, paid people's mortgages, and did all kinds of stuff. And as he met the people, and got to know that his heart really began to soften, and he really began to buckle down and learn the business. And as he began to learn the business, his heart began to soften and just turn into a wonderful boss. And at home, he began to really get to know Clara and who she was and how she operated, and really began like, and Harry, his bodyguard, really said, if you're going to be married to this woman for a year, why don't you get to know who she really is? And so it started little by little with him saying good morning, Clara, and being nicer to her, and really developing a rapport and having conversations. And he got to the point where he really began to like her, and he really began to like his new life and his job and the people he worked for. Um, and one day, um, after, okay, his uncle's biggest event of the year for the company was the company Christmas party. And Clara really began to fall in love with him. At the first, at first she hated him, but because he was making an effort, she was too. She began to slowly open up to him, and she began to slowly have feelings for him, romantic feelings, but she, she was afraid that he would not have those feelings for her. So she didn't say anything. And Mary said, you've got to tell him how you feel. You've got to tell him that you're falling in love with him. And Clara says, oh, says you, Mary says, you've got to take a chance. What have you got to lose? You've got to be married for a year anyway. You signed a contract. And so after the party, she confesses her feelings, and he confesses that he's starting to feel that way for her. And so they're intimate that night as a married couple for the first time. So all of this is going really well. The job's going really well. He's beginning to learn. He's learning responsibility. He's learning how to run the company. He's learning how to love his people. And he's learning all of this. And then everything is going well at home. They're intimate every night. They're talking every night, and they're really falling in love. And they've made the decision that they want to be married forever. That this is a forever thing, not just a year. So everything is going well until Brian overhears Joseph talking to another member of the board, wanting to frame Brian. But Brian says, oh no, that couldn't be Joseph loved my uncle, and he wouldn't do that. So I must have overheard, and I must have overreacted. But a few days later, um, the police came to the office. Apparently, um, apparently, it looked like Brian had embezzled money from the company. I had stolen billions of dollars from the company. And Brian's like, what are you talking about? I didn't steal anything. Um, I love this company too much. I love this people. I wouldn't do that. And like um, Joseph said, well, you would because you did before. He was like, well, that was before I really got to know the people. I really got to know who my grandfather was and who I was. He's like, I wouldn't do that. And the board voted uh, to not only fire him, but to actually throw him out and give Joseph, because he had controlling of his grandfather's shares. So not only did they fire him from the investment company, but they gave his shares to Joseph, and gave him um, ownership of the company as CEO. So Brian found out that all along Joseph was scheming to be the head of this company, and then he came home and said to his wife, "Why is this happening to me? I finally found purpose in my life. I finally found you, and now it's all being taken away from me." And his wife says, Clara says, there's gotta be some clues as to where the money went and who is doing this to you. And he's like, you believe me, right? She's like, of course I believe you. I believe that you're a changed man. I believe that you're not the same old Brian that you were. You are a compassionate, caring man, and I love you. And I don't believe that you would ever do this. So let's find out what happened, and we will find out what happened. So they dig and dig and dig and dig and dig, and there's nothing out of the ordinary. And for all intents and purposes, it looks like the missing money from the missing account went into Brian's account. But one day they are they both Brian and Clara are so confused and so depressed that they decide to take another look, and it turned out that the um, the company the company that a company that they were doing business with was not a real company. It was a shell company. And sometimes people use shell companies for money laundering and drugs and all that. But it turned out when they did some digging through through Harry and Mary, because they got them involved, that the company one of the investment companies that they were doing business with wasn't a real company. It was a shell company, and that shell company led straight back to Joseph. And the man that they thought was the owner of that company was really Joseph's crooked brother who was in jail. So they brought all this evidence um, to Joseph's installation ceremony as CEO, because before he could really become acting CEO, they needed to, in the bylaws, they had to have an installation ceremony. So, so in the middle of the installation ceremony, Clara zooms up with her wheelchair with her husband, Brian, and says, "Wait, stop!" And they present all this evidence, and then Joseph says, "This is preposterous," uh, and and um, and there are witnesses, um, and they prove that the company, one of the companies that they were doing business with, was actually a company that he uh, was a shell company. So the money was actually um, coming from the legitimate company through the shell company to Joseph's bank account and back to the shell company. So, so needless to say, Joseph went to jail for embezzlement of funds, and Brian took over the company. And at the end, when the whole thing was over, Clara told Brian that she was pregnant and they had a little boy. So I hope that you enjoyed this Storytime Sunday. See you next week, YouTube. Bye.